Well, let's continue the conversation on the issue of Thabo Bester and his escape from prison and the position of the correctional services and all of those who have to give account as to what transpired and what steps are to be taken in future. Watching the story closely and actually interviewing Thabo Bester was forensic and investigative psychologist Dr. Gerard Labuschagne, and he interviewed Bester to establish a profile. Dr. Labuschagne, good evening to you. Welcome. It's lovely to have you with us. And just to clarify for our viewers, the interview that you had conducted with him is now part of public record.
Hi, Iman. Thanks a lot. Yeah, so I was asked shortly after his arrest in October 2011 by the investigating team to come down and have an interview with him. Now, ultimately, if it had needed to testify at sentencing, I probably would have then compiled a report to do so. So at that point, it was really just an interview to get a bit of insight into who he was, etc., his version of events and the like. So it wasn't a confrontational interview, which was really just get an impression of him and what he has to say.
So when you listen to him speak, I mean, he seems to be dissociative, saying things like, I didn't know that I was doing rape. In respect of the murder, I'm responsible for her death, but I'm not responsible for killing her. Share how you frame an interview like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the type of things, we want to see how he responds to the events. Does he deny them? So he was admitting, that he had raped them. But of course, like we often see with offenders, they kind of soften the blow. They won't kind of give the full story, but they'll kind of admit to certain things, but soften it in some way. And I think in that interview, he said, he later realized what he had done to those two ladies was rape. And of course, in relation to the murder, he said, I'm responsible for her dying because I brought the knife to the argument, but I didn't, intentionally stab her. Of course, he did later plead guilty to murder, which implies the intent to kill. So we often find offenders will try and minimize, soften the blow, etc. And that might just be a standard tactic to be not held as responsible. But of course, it can, in extreme circumstances, indicate a certain personality type that doesn't really, accept responsibility for what they do and feel much empathy for their victims.
What conclusions or assessments did you make about his frame of mind and his motivation, Gerard?
Well, I mean, obviously he had full capacity for what he'd done at the time. He referred to sort of his rough upbringing that he had, and I can't remember the specific details of the upbringing, but abuse that he experienced, sexual abuse that he experienced as growing up, etc. And trying to present that as some kind of mitigating factor. And I think in the interview I said to him, but lots of people that go through that kind of stuff or horrible things, and they never go on to hurt anybody. So, that's also not what I typically say in court. That's not an explanation for or an excuse for what the individual has done. But again, that probably was part of his minimizing attempts to, I guess, create some kind of a sympathy or empathy on his behalf to win some favor to some degree.
Well, you talk about winning favor, and that's a key attribute of what seems to have been his behavior from behind bars. He was able to conduct a high-profile event and really win the confidence of a number of people in the project he was working on. He certainly managed to convince a number of people to get involved in his escape from prison, and he is ostensibly out there now. That's a type of, that type of pathology. I mean, how would you describe that? How do you assess that?
I mean, so conning people was part of his rapes. He can, convince them that he was, a modeling agent of some sort and could assist them. So that was part of his rape and his murder. He had a previous conviction prior to the rapes for fraud. And of course, what you allegedly has done in prison is kind of more of the same thing. So again, that does point towards his personality that I won't use the word I'd like to use, but he misleads people, and he's very convincing and good at it. And like I said, that was involved in his rape cases, it was involved in his fraud cases, and it seems to be involved in what he's doing here now. So again, that could, of course, point towards a certain personality type, but he would have to have a proper assessment to determine if he has that kind of psychological personality. But it just seems over the years that it's gotten worse. He's, in fact, more successful in prison than he was before. I mean, before prison, it was petty theft kind of things, lie to his victims, take their laptop, take their cell phone, and of course, then commit the rape.
Wow. So in a sense, he got smarter and more sophisticated. Do you find that to be typical of the serials? And I see your book, The Profiler Diaries, behind you. This is one of your specialties, your areas in creating these profiles around some of the most prolific serial killers and serial behaviorists or serial criminals in South Africa.
Yeah, so definitely we would classify him as a serial rapist because he committed 2 separate incidences of rape. And of course, what's very concerning is that he's escalated into murder. So, is that the first step towards becoming a serial murderer? I think we have to definitely look at it that way, because we've seen it with serial murderers who first had rapes that they participated in and then go on to committing murders. So definitely that is a huge concern, that he's a serial murderer in development, but definitely a serial rapist. And those kind of individuals, do not change. That power dynamics relating to sexual crimes will always be present. So he's a huge danger to society. And I think that's where, perhaps correctional services, or whether it's the responsibility of the private prison, to have notified the public sooner. Obviously, in the early days when they realized he was missing, you might not yet want to announce that he's missing because, you want to follow up on investigative leads and you don't want to let him know that you're onto him. But of course, once that phase of investigation is passed, you really do need to warn the public about this individual and put pictures out there so that everybody knows what he looks like, that people, specifically ladies, can make sure that they don't get duped by this guy and potentially raped and murdered.
And that is what's so concerning, Gerard, is that we heard in the aftermath of his conviction and sentencing, the victims, survivors of his actions were relieved that he was finally behind bars. Are they at risk tonight, and what behaviors and protective measures should they be undertaking?
Yeah. Look, I think it would be difficult for me to say I'm automatically concerned about the victims. He pled guilty, so those victims didn't even have to testify against him. He pled guilty to the 2 rapes, and in a separate case down in Cape Town, the murder, he pled guilty down there. So, it's not as if he didn't, he brought it upon himself because he committed the acts, but he also pled guilty. I think it would be for him, who's perhaps more narcissistic in nature, to go after the victims would be really putting yourself in jeopardy, because that's a very good way to get caught. So I don't really think his previous victims have too much to worry about. I'll be more worried about any other woman that he meets. And of course, the question of how much danger is this alleged partner of his is in, difficult to say. So he is automatically a threat because he's a serial rapist and murderer. But I don't really think his previous victims have too much to worry about. It's not impossible, but that wasn't my first thoughts when I heard that he has escaped, that they should be very, very concerned about their own safety.
Gerard Labuschagne, thank you very much for talking to us tonight. We appreciate your analysis. That is Dr. Gerard Labuschagne, forensic and investigative psychologist.